Today, I wanted to ask the tough question. When do you know if you have an action figure collection or addiction? Today, we get real. And I go over some interesting info from a neuroscientist who's a collector. So let's go. Welcome back to the journey. So do you have a collection or an addiction? And a few episodes ago, I posed some problems that we as collectors have. Whether it's running out of space, running out of interest, running out of money, and going into financial ruin, or a big one, when collecting harms your personal life and your personal relationships. And if you want to go back and watch that one before you watch this one, I suggest that you do. And that link is up there in the corner, and there's also one down there in the description of this video. But in this video, I'm asking the question, collection or addiction? And is there a fine line? On a monthly and sometimes daily basis, I am hearing, reading, and seeing firsthand how collectors have been consumed negatively when it comes to their own collections. And even in the comments of that episode that I did about the problems of collecting, you all offered some relatable stories explaining what you're going through now or what you've gone through in the past. And even if you're a new or a seasoned collector and you've never had those pitfalls to go through, it's always good to be self-aware and to be aware of what's happening inside the community. And the good thing is, if you do a search on YouTube for collecting or addiction, a lot of collectors have made videos about this very topic. And I think it's cool to hear opinions from different people about this. So here's my take. One of the main problems that I see for myself and for some of you that I talk to in the community is when collecting affects your personal life and those around you. Whether it's your partner, your family, your job, or even balancing the time that you used to give to other activities like working out, sports, clubs, and other things that may be more social in nature. Because the last time I checked, unless you're actually physically hunting for a toy, let's face it, collecting action figures isn't that active. But here's what I want to get to in this video that I hadn't before, is what's going on inside our heads rather than why we collect. What goes on inside our mammalian brain that turns a collection into an addiction? And what are the professionals in the mental health space saying about collecting? And the main point, to recognize when a collection does become an addiction. So let's dive into that. Now, personally, I've set up my current collection run to be focused on only collecting the Kenner Star Wars vintage figures made from 1977 to 1985. And I have 3 more figures left to go on my loose run. So if you want to go back to the beginning of my run, go check out episode 1 and binge watch until you get here, because that'll give you a sense of my journey and what it took me to get here today. Now, my collection run is pretty structured. I laid it all out in a collection sheet that I created, and I was able to set aside an account to spend on these figures, so I knew what my budget was going into it and how much I could spend a month on these figures. But I've always been honest with you, and I'm gonna be honest right now, and this is important before we go on to this next segment of the video. Sometimes I went off the rails and I added in pieces to my collection and items that I did not plan for and that I did not budget for, and items that were sometimes out of my budget range. And most of these items were impulse buys, big time. And they were never supposed to be on my collection run at all. And like I said, they weren't budgeted for. But it's so hard because when you see it, you just want it. When it comes on your Facebook feed or your eBay suggestions, it's just so hard to say. Exactly, Vader. And that's how it was with items like my Burger King glasses, and now my vintage Topps collection, or my Ahsoka Focus. Most of those items, in most cases, were impulse buys, and items I didn't budget for. But beyond that, even in my vintage run, there were times when I went over my scheduled monthly budget, and I did that exactly 4 times. Now, the first 2 times it happened, I made sure to carry the deficit to the next month so I didn't overspend. And there's ways that I have my entire collection balanced out. I usually plan what I hunt for, and I research the figures, and I have it laid out to where in my schedule I can buy relatively low cost figures and some figures that I already had and I just needed the accessories for, like my $15 Reeves blaster or my Admiral Akbar staff. That way it gives me a break in my schedule where I'm not spending a lot of money just to acquire a figure. And I made sure that I didn't buy 3 or 4 expensive figures back to back. And if you're enjoying the content so far, please hit the like button. That does support the channel. And also, please consider subscribing. And please visit the PadawanCollector.com, where you can see blogs, bonus material, and you can visit the Collector Depot for accessories that you may need for your collection. And I made sure not to buy 3 or 4 expensive figures in back-to-back weeks or months, but spread those figures out strategically throughout the year. And that worked for me. And if a deal came up, one that I could not say no to, I just made sure to rework my schedule so that way the following week or month I wasn't buying an expensive figure. Kind of spread it out. And that seems like a lot of work, but for me to successfully do this run and document it on YouTube, that's exactly what I needed to do to make sure that this whole run was financially responsible. And I could have bought a full lot. Let's just be clear about that. And I didn't want to do it for this run, but that's another topic for a video that I have coming up. And I have some interesting thoughts about that. But back to the video. So lately, and this is why I wanted to do this video and have a conversation with you. To be real, lately, I had been going over my budget. And although it's not an incredibly detrimental amount, I had to mentally check myself. And I had to really stop my spending because it could have gotten out of hand really quick. And then that's when I found myself Googling collection or addiction. And that's where it got real for me. So what are the professionals saying about this very topic? Well, according to Shirley M. Mueller, MD, who is a neuroscientist and board certified in psychiatry and neurology, and she's also a collector herself. And she wrote a book called Inside the Head of a Collector, Neuropsychological Forces at Play. And a link to that book is down there in my description. She calls collecting a behavioral addiction. And she defines that as a compulsion to engage in an activity that may have harmful consequences, and that some behavioral addictions include things like excessive gambling, eating, sex, social media overconsumption, shopping, and even plastic surgery. And she notes that behavioral addiction is not a substance addiction that requires a craving like drugs or alcohol. But what's the difference between a behavioral addiction like eating to a substance and chemical addiction like drugs or alcohol? Well, according to Mueller, they share similar neural pathways like a substance addiction. And they both produce dopamine, which aids in a feeling of reward for that behavior. And in the context of collecting, it's the physical and ritual acts that lead up to us getting that figure, like the ritual of hunting, buying, and holding that figure in our hands that activate these reward factors. But on the flip side to feeling good, behavioral addiction can also trigger depression and anxiety. Like when those rituals and end result aren't met with that dopamine rush of fulfillment, such as losing out on an eBay auction or going to a toy con only to find out that that exclusive figure that you wanted has been sold out. And she also references to collecting directly, saying that if it's compulsory, it may lead to excluding other activities that you once used to do in life, like if you stop exercising or attending social events that you used to go to, like being a part of a club or a sports team. And those negative effects fit into the definition of a behavioral addiction, and it can lead to messy personal relationships and financial distress or ruin. But she goes on to say that unlike substance addictions, behavioral addictions like collecting tend to be transient for most. Well, what's that mean? So even without treatment, these behaviors sometimes went away on their own. So sometimes like a trend or a fad that you have in life, like acid wash jeans or cargo shorts. And some y'all still do that. And I wish cargo shorts would come back. So that fad or trend may burn bright for a couple of months or years, and then it goes away to lack of interest or excitement. And that's sometimes due to changes in our life, new interests, or when you start dating somebody new or get married, have kids, new people come into our life, and your lifestyle just changes. And sometimes that high motivation that you had towards that collection goes down to the wayside, and your collection turns into a fad, something that gets moved from one room to the other until it winds up in the basement or the attic, and then eventually gets sold to people like me. So what are the stats on this? While substance abuse affects 1 out of every 10 Americans today, behavioral addictions are even less common than that. But you have to look into that number and say that most people aren't being diagnosed for it, so those stats are misconstrued. There's also that factor you have to look out for, because a lot more people may have that problem and just never get diagnosed for it. And those are stats that are left uncounted. But most of us who collect, like me, do it from a base and a foundation of nostalgia and trying to capture that feeling that we had when we were kids, like when times were simpler, when we were more impressionable, both in our emotions and our logical mental development of how we saw the world. and how we imagined the world around us. And our toys and how we used and developed our imaginations used to be a way to take us out of stressful situations in most cases. And it's often said by psychologists and people who study behavioral addictions is that that was a blocker and a safe zone for us kids to guard us from having to deal with that stress in the present. So we use that cognitive memory of toys being that safe space for us. And that subconsciously, as adults, that dopamine that released back then when we were kids has that same effect now. So if you're an adult and your safe space right now and your joy comes from toys, well, it might be that subconscious dopamine flowing back and letting you know you're safe. And it's that adult imaginary figure letting you play with your toys and safeguarding you from stress as an adult. And that is completely healthy. But as adults, whether we do it for nostalgia, a financial investment like an art collector or art dealer, as a challenge to be a completionist like me, or as a preservationist too, most of us collect a certain line of figures based on that nostalgia factor, because that's what sparked us as a kid. And it becomes compulsory as we start finishing those lines. And that need for a neurological fix, for more satisfaction, and more of a hunt for that satisfaction. So I just wanted to talk on this episode and not just look at the problems that we face as collectors like I did in the last episode, but I wanted to take a look at the psychological and physiological aspects of how collecting can become an addiction, and of course what the experts are saying about it. Now, if you find yourself in this category and your collection is starting to become an addiction and it's becoming an issue and compacting the rest of your life, especially in a harmful way, I'm not in the position to give advice, and I'm in no way certified to. But there are ways that you can seek help out, either through your healthcare provider who can offer a good counseling service for you, your church or your place of worship or faith. But the main thing is to talk to somebody who is qualified in that area of behavioral addiction and to have them help you assess your options. And this isn't advice, but this is what I did. When I found myself at a crossroads and when I knew that I was going over my budgets and I thought it was becoming compulsory and I was going over my budgets that I set in my guidelines, and the first thing I did is that I talked to Mrs. Padawan about it. And I let her know what I did and what was going on. And lucky that I have a good relationship with her, and I really wanted to be open about it. And I wanted to let her know that I was addressing the problem and that I knew that it could potentially become a problem. And I told her my plan of stopping and curbing my spending for a defined duration. And I think by doing that, it made me accountable. And it also made sure that she was gonna be there to help me monitor and, keep myself in check with what I thought could have become a problem. And when I was back on track, I made sure to stay the path and not get crossed up again, which I haven't, or else she would kick my booty. Let's be honest. And it's hard because I saw items either that I wanted, needed, or items that were available at a great price. And I even had to stop in my head justifying it just so I can get it. But I honored my timeline and what I needed to do to get back on track. And there are other ways to do this. I'm just telling you what I did. And if you find yourself not excited about a collection that you're currently on, but want to start another one, selling off your old collection to make room for your new one, that's perfectly fine. In fact, that's what I did early on in my run. I sold almost all of my modern collection. That way I can make room and have some extra cash flow to invest in my vintage collection. But like I said, I'm not gonna offer advice on that. That's just what I did. I just really wanted to shed some light on this issue in the community. I wanted to see what some experts were saying. And I also wanted to take a break from this week of collecting and give my wallet a financial rest. So I hope that this episode can shed some light for you on the fine line between what is a collection and an addiction. And I'm very interested to hear your thoughts about this. And please let me know down there in the comments. And also to continue this conversation on any one of my social media platforms. And all of those links are down there in the description of this video as well. And we're a collecting community, so sharing information, not just about toys, but on ways that'll keep your collections going and ways that are gonna bring us the most fun doing it, well, those are important too. So in the next episode, we get back into collecting and finishing my loose run of the vintage Kenner Star Wars action figures. 3 more to go. So please like this video if you found it interesting. Join me on all my social media pages and join this channel as a member and make content like this possible. And please subscribe for more Star Wars and collecting content. And as always, my friends, thank you, and I will see you next time. If you're new to the channel, check out the welcome video, or just check out the next episode. And please subscribe if you want to follow the journey. And remember, there is no shame in being a Padawan.